you can die and go to hell. You can actually go to hell. And don't we all struggle with that?
There's room for thinking about what is the character and nature of God, and would God do that? But at the same time, that can go too far to where you put yourself in the place of God and you're deciding everything when God has clearly said X.
I think in a way it has gone too far. Things that in the Christian tradition you would have always considered to be against Scripture, to be against God, we're now saying, oh no, you know what? We figured out that's okay. We don't even know how we got here. And we all pretend it's not a big deal. Neil deGrasse Tyson saying in Nova, and then life was created, and it's a great mystery. And then he just keeps going. Wait a minute, that should be the whole 25
that's the
episodes.
Biggest thing, well,
that should be the whole 25 episodes is how did life get here, right? Peter versus Judas. Judas didn't come back. It wasn't even on his radar, right? And if people get anything out of this book, I hope that they pause. I hope that they just pause and say, how am I doing, you know? And what am I sweeping under the rug, and what am I ignoring? And you know, where do I need to come back? You know, weep bitterly like Peter did, but come back. You got to come back.
Hey there, folks. Welcome to Socrates in the City. The city in which we find ourselves is New York City in the great state of New York. I call it the Empire State. A lot of times when I'm introducing someone, it's complicated and I want to read their bio, and other times it's even more complicated because I just want to say, ladies and gentlemen, I have the joy today of speaking to my friend, Peter Giersch. Peter, welcome.
Thank you, Eric.
Isn't that simple? It's very simple.
Right? Keep it simple.
First of all, you're a friend. I've known you for many years. But we're here today principally to talk about your new book. The book is called Talking of Michelangelo, Death, Judgment, Heaven and Hell in the Burgundy Region. And on the cover of the book is a delightful endorsement from Eric Metaxas, the best-selling author. He refers to the book as a gorgeous memoir. Well, what does he know, Peter?
That's right.
Before we get into the book, which is why we're here, it's always difficult to give people's bio or whatever. How do you describe yourself in a nutshell? Because you're not someone who has spent his professional life writing books.
Yeah. Well, I guess, I think of how God has this sense of humor, because if you'd have told me when I was 18 that I was going to be being interviewed about my new book, I'd be like, of course I'd have believed that. I thought I was going to be a famous author. Instead, I met a woman, wanted to have 5 kids. I got into the business world, started a business, and that was all fun. And then lo and behold, 25, 30 years later, all those things I wanted to do back then came back around, So I've always been an artist. I've always been an author. I've always been a writer, songwriter, singer, whatever. But I just had to raise 5 kids and figure out where to pay for it. So I took a 20-year break, and now here I am. So,
well, the way this book came to me, I have to tell the story because it's sort of related to the larger conversation we want to have. But since I've been writing books, people will often send me manuscripts, or friends will say, I'm writing a book, will you take a look at my book, or whatever. And a lot of people have this fantasy about, I want to write a book. And writing books I always just think of it as it's work. It's not like people just have this idea like, I want to write a great opera, or I want to, whatever. And the mechanics of actually writing a book and what that is it's hard work, and it's a craft, and so on and so forth. So I get a lot of books sent to me over the years that they're not well written, and they're not fun or easy to read. And unfortunately, this book, no. And so it's hard, especially if it's a friend, because a lot of times the
content is good content. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't read particularly well. But when you some years ago, I guess four or so years ago, sent me, said I was working on a book, and Eric, could you look at it, or something like that. I was in this insanely busy period, and it haunted me because I thought this old friend has sent me this thing. I should at least look at it and give him an opinion.
No, you totally blew me off. I
meant to.
I finally said, I used to play Supertramp for you in your apartment.
On the piano.
Yeah, on the
I know.
piano. And you finally wrote back and said, which song?
But it was like one of those periods in my life where I don't have 5 minutes even to respond to the email or whatever it was. But finally, I grabbed a hold of myself and started to read your manuscript, and I was frankly stunned at how good it was.
Wow.
Not because I don't think you're capable of that or whatever, but it's just that I think it's rare that even friends would send me something and I would just say, wow, this is not what I'd expected. Because I think of you as a businessman.
Yeah.
I don't think of you as an author of memoirs or anything like that. So it was such a happy, pleasant surprise to read the book. But I never dreamt that I would be involved in publishing the book. So this is where it gets weird, because
Right.
I thought,
Yeah.
hey, Peter, so you want to publish this book. I'm doing a publishing imprint called Odysseus Books, and maybe you can help me on the business side of it.
Yeah.
And what's the first book we published with Odysseus Books? Talking of Michelangelo by Peter Giersch. It's just kind of a beautiful thing the way that happened. All right, so when I try not to blow smoke, and so I don't say something's a gorgeous memoir if I don't think it is. The book is so many things, it's hard to describe. We're going to get into it, but the question is, what led you to write this book? Because you could write many different kinds of books. You're a man of faith. When did you say, this is a book?
The minute at the end of the book there, I have an experience that kind of wraps up my dark night of the soul and brings me out of it. I went back to the room in that retreat house.
I haven't even, why don't you do our audience a favor and say what the book's about?
So the book's about my trip to France for my 40th birthday. I thought, I've heard everything anybody has to say about the faith in English, right? Like when you work in church work and you do this stuff, you've heard every sermon.
You've been around the block.
You've heard every sermon.
What are you going to hear at a
read,
retreat?
You can finish every Bible verse somebody starts, and I thought, what if I went and did it in French? Wouldn't that be fun?
What if I did a retreat in France in the French language? So
Yeah.
you have enough French to even think about that.
I do. So after college, I decided to, what do you do with English and French major, right? Nothing. There is no job for you. So I went and lived in Paris for 6 months.
You were an English and French major?
Yeah.
I didn't remember that part.
Well, I was French minor, but yeah. So I was an English major and French minor.
Let's go back there. You grew up in Milwaukee.
In Milwaukee, yep. Dad was a truck driver and with an 8th grade education. And I was the first person since the Gershevskis came over from Prussia in the 1860s to get a 4-year college degree. But as soon as I started taking English classes in high school, as soon as I read Catcher in the Rye, I was like, wait a minute, this guy's just walking around talking. I could do that. And it's, you talked about how hard it is to write a book, unless you find the voice. Now, I know you've read Mark Twain's Joan of Arc. In the beginning, in the introduction, he talks about how hard he struggled to find the voice for that book. And until he found it, he couldn't get going. The minute he figured out the voice, whoosh. And that's kind of what my writing career has been like. The minute I read Catcher in the Rye, I was like, oh, I could do that. It's just sort of stream of consciousness.
At least you thought you could do that.
I
think you could,
yeah.
But a lot of people think you could do it, and then when you try to do it, it's not so easy. But okay, so you have such an interesting background, and you're really a man of letters and the arts. But before your 40th birthday, you make a decision to go on a retreat to a French monastery, and you didn't go on the retreat with the intention of writing a book about it.
No.
But
I had 4 little kids and one on the way. I was just trying to get some sleep, actually.
yeah,
Right.
right.
I was just trying to get away, and I'd love to travel. I'd already, I lived in Paris. I'd, spent time over in France, and like, who doesn't like France? There's that phrase, "as happy as God in France." Like, how could God be happier? Only by being in France. So that it just sounded like a fun thing to do.
Yeah, and it was.
And it was,
but it was more than fun.
Well, it was more than fun because these darn monks took their faith so seriously that they made me question everything, particularly death, judgment, heaven and hell, and mortal sin.
So
and
it's
all
not
the
a
rest of that.
so you're not being arch when you say talking to Michelangelo, death, judgment, heaven and hell in the Burgundy region. And obviously, having read the book twice, you don't make fun of it. You take it seriously, and there's something extremely refreshing about that. And you're a very literary writer, but you're not overly literary. Like this is not, you're not Thomas Howard,
Yeah.
whom we both
Right.
love.
Right. Who's
Love.
amazing, yeah.
I mean,
Right.
I recommend his books everywhere I go, especially Chance to the Dance. But you don't go that far, but you're still a very literary writer. You're referencing things. And the title, why don't we start there? I mean, you framed it that this is the story of you on a, how long was it, a week?
Yeah, it was a week, yeah.
A week-long retreat.
Actually, I think the whole thing was 2 weeks with the trip all
yeah,
together.
and you're in Paris first. You write about that.
Yeah.
But why do you title the book Talking of Michelangelo?
So you called it a literary memoir or something like that. And, being an English major, you read so much that you learn subtlety, right? So Talking of Michelangelo is a phrase from the poem by T.S. Eliot about Prufrock. And I make the case in the book that this Prufrock poem is really about death, judgment, heaven, and hell. And it's a pretty convincing, I think, argument about that.
So this is part literary exegesis or part literary criticism, actually what you're doing here.
Yeah. So, but in that poem, the women come and go talking of Michelangelo. Who doesn't love just saying that? It's fun to say. And that's in the poem. And I argue that it's in the poem to point back to Michelangelo's Last Judgment. And that's why it's on the cover of the book. And I refer to Michelangelo's Last Judgment.
The picture of Michelangelo's Last Judgment.
Yeah. So the Talking of Michelangelo is meant to reference that idea that Michelangelo painted the Last Judgment, and the Last Judgment, covers death, judgment, heaven, and hell, and all these topics. And I refer to it in the book. But it's funny, you practice subtlety as a writer, and then some people got this book and they wanted to interview me about Michelangelo's life and his biography and all these things. And I'm like, well, and they kept saying, well, it's talking about Michelangelo. And I'm like, well, that's actually, so you practice subtlety as a writer, but not everybody's going to get it. And it's just a risk you take, and that's fine. But I think if people
You're experiencing the joys of being a writer interviewed by people who haven't taken 5 minutes to read what your book is about.
Exactly, yeah.
Oh, the joy.
It happens.
All right, so the poem, let's talk about that for a minute because you're framing things this way. T.S. Eliot, I don't know, in the 20s, or is this before The
20s.
Wasteland?
It was the 20s, yeah.
It's well before The Wasteland. He writes the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, which starts...
Let us go then, you and I, when evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table.
So the refrain in there is, in the room, the women come and go. One of them looks like Barry Manilow. No, I got that wrong.
I never heard that one.
That's in my book. That's in my memoir, actually, because we did a parody of J. Alfred Prufrock in the Yale Humor magazine.
Oh, nice.
I stuck in the line, one of them looks like Barry Manilow. But it's a beautiful poem, and you're making the case, and I don't know that anybody else has made the case, that most of the literary criticism around the poem is getting this wrong.
Absolutely. You can read, I referenced the Prentice Hall Anthology of American Literature, all the teacher's editions that I ever taught from when I taught high school, and the college courses I sat through. It's all about Prufrock is this shrinking violet who's like afraid to talk to women. And it's just so silly because there's so much in there that points to this question of judgment. In particular, the fact that Prufrock wants to say, I am Lazarus, come back from the dead to tell you all, I shall tell you all. And most books like the Prentice Hall Anthology of American Literature will reference John 11, where Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. That's the wrong Lazarus.
When I read that, I have to tell you, that's huge.
Right?
That you picked up on that. And it shows the tremendous ignorance when it comes to the Bible of whatever, the secular world, the literary world, the fact that they
Yeah.
would get this totally wrong.
I had all my kids in English class cross out John 11 and write in, I don't forget if it's Matthew or Luke, but I think it's Luke, the actual story of the beggar Lazarus, because there the rich man who wouldn't give the beggar the time of day ends up going to hell, and the beggar goes to heaven, and the rich man is saying, Father Abraham, send Lazarus to come and dip his finger in the water, and he's like, nope, can't do that. Then send him back to my brothers to warn them about hell. And Abraham says, they can just read the Bible basically, the Moses and the prophets. And he says, no, Abraham, if someone would come back from the dead, that would change their mind. And then Prufrock says, I am Lazarus, come back from the dead to tell you all I shall tell you all. I don't know how people miss that. Not only that, but the love song of J.F. Prufrock is prefaced, well, probably they miss it because it's in Italian, by Dante's, a guy in hell in Dante's Inferno who was in hell for giving false judgment, for giving false counsel, I'm sorry. And so he was afraid this guy gave false counsel, and Prufrock is struggling, to tell all these people taking their toast and tea and their teas and cakes and ices. He's afraid to force the moments to his crisis and tell them the truth about heaven and hell, which he saw wandering around the streets of London
This is, I mean, honestly, if there was nothing else about this book, the fact that you have humiliated generations of literary critics. I mean, seriously, how embarrassing! Because you're saying that the epigram, T.S. Eliot gives you the clue in the epigram.
Right? The guy's in hell.
It's like he's shooting off a flare
right.
to let you know, like, just in case you're going to get this wrong. And they still don't get it.
And they take a couple lines about women, arms braceleted, white and bare, but in the lamplight, donned with light brown hair, right? I'm sure you know all those lines from that poem too.
Is the ending the writing seaward on the waves?
Yeah. Red and brown.
And seaweed wreathed with seaweed red and brown.
Till human voices wake us and we
crown. That's in my memoir.
Yeah. Is that right?
It's kind of weird that we both, I forgot all about this. Yeah. Oh, it's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful poem. Anyway, so you use Eliot's poem to frame
I do, and I
story.
talk about it as a hermeneutic key, right? This picking the wrong Lazarus is picking the wrong hermeneutic key, right? To unlock the poem. So they pick the little things about the women instead of picking the right Lazarus. And of course, again, I practice subtlety, and I hope it's not too subtle. But as I'm struggling with death, judgment, heaven, and hell, I'm having these hermeneutic keys for me about my family and those I love, and reading things I've read. I talk a lot about Puddleglum, right? And the silver chair, and his speech in the silver chair about there's no overworld. These are hermeneutic keys.
Well, C.S. Lewis, in his Narnia Chronicles, for anybody who's not getting the reference, in the silver chair, he creates this character, a marshwiggle called Puddleglum. It's so brilliant. Lewis is
so brilliant.
Brilliant. Yeah. But yeah, you refer to the scene where he's down with the White Witch in the cave.
Yeah, right.
And
right.
I guess there's a correlation to Plato's cave, except we don't need to get into that.
Yeah.
But talk about that.
The witch is throwing an aromatic on the fire, and she's strumming her harp, and she's thrum, and trying to convince the kids and the marshwiggle and the prince that there is no overworld, there's no world beyond that cave, and that everything that they can point to, like the sun and the trees, are just things they made up based on things down in the cave,
Sounds like
in
Carl
the underworld.
Sagan.
Well, I was going to say, and I think I say in my book, I mean, that's what people say, well, this is all just wishful thinking. But Puddleglum is brave enough to say, you know what, even if it's wishful thinking, it's better than all this. I'd rather live like a Narnian, even if there is no Narnia and there's no Aslan to lead it. It's a little bit like Pascal's wager, there's a coin spinning at the end of the universe, right? And it heads, it's all true about Christianity, and tails it's false. Why not just bet that it's true? Because it's so beautiful, and there's so much that you can get out of it, even just in this life.
Well, so let's tell this story. You're a middle-aged guy. You're going to turn 40. You convince Carol, your wife, I'm going to go on a retreat in France. And what did you expect before you went? What were you thinking it was going to be like?
Yeah. I think the weekend in Paris gives a hint there. It's all about port wine and cigars and, Paris and all that. And I'm like, and on that weekend, I'm kind of starting to regret, like, oh, why am I coming all the way to Paris to skulk around in a monastery for a week? Like, am I even going to get to do anything? Is it going to be fun? And then I get to the monastery a day early and I want to golf. And I get really crabby because it's raining and I can't golf, and it just shows you that I was going in with completely the wrong attitude, right? I mean, it was just about what I wanted to get out of it, right? What this experience that I wanted to engineer for myself. And then Father Andre, who's kind of the hero of the story, walks in. I meet him for the first time. He goes to the window, he opens the curtains, and he says just to himself, just absently, it is the will of God that it is raining today. And it hit me so hard, I say in the book, that, suddenly I thought, wow, I'm in the presence of a holy man. And I think, maybe God is real. And then I'm like, well, I thought I already believed that God was real. But at that moment, there was like, I'm on a different playing field than this guy.
That's to me the story, is that you go into this as a faithful Catholic Christian. There's no doubt that it's
Right.
not like
Why would I go there if
you're
I was-
wondering about, well, a lot of people do. A lot of people might have really weak faith and think like, you know what, I think I'm going to try this monastery thing. But you're already there.
Right.
You've written about the faith. You're all in.
Yeah.
But something about being in the presence of these holy men changes your perspective.
Yeah, it's like if you've ever tried to fix anything around your house and then you call a professional, you're like, oh, look at the tools he's got, look at the way he holds them, look at the way he does this stuff. I don't know what I'm doing. That was a little bit like, these guys are the real deal. So it's and that was really what got me thinking seriously about the faith. And when you start thinking seriously about the faith, the question of death, judgment, heaven, and hell, you can't get away from it. It's Damocles' sword, right? We're all going to die. I recently buried my father, and that's something that tells you, like, whoa, like I'm next, right? So it's worth thinking about these things seriously, and that's what the book tries to do, but in a fun way.
Yes, and it does it in a fun way. One of the other things that I can praise about the book is that it got me thinking about those things. And I think most people would think that I'm already thinking about those things. Of course I'm thinking about those things. But no, there was something about reading the book that just stopped me in a way that I hadn't been stopped in a while. I realized that. And it reminded me of your experience at the monastery. Like, because you put yourself in a different context, you're able to breathe and think about something that maybe because of racing through life, you normally wouldn't.
Yeah, and I use actually a home improvement thing at the end there when I talk about what happened on this retreat. In home improvement, sometimes you got to rip out the floor, you got to rip out the drywall, you got to take it back to the studs.
Right.
And that's what this retreat did for me, because it's easy to say, oh yeah, I believe in God, I go to church, I'm a good guy, I'm a Christian, I'm going to heaven, blah, blah, blah. But being in the presence of these monks who took it really, really seriously, they lived it, right? Every day, all day. It forced me to take it back to the studs, because when they're talking about hell, I really struggle with it to the point where I think, maybe it'd be easier not to be a Christian than to really face these questions, to face these questions in all their reality, in all their frightening reality.
Well, there's this moment, it's the moment in the book, and I don't know how specific we can get without giving it away, but my theory is always you can't give too much away. That's nonsense, because people, I know how Moby Dick turns out, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to read it.
Exactly.
Talk about this dark night of the soul, because it really is. It's beautiful and interesting what happened to you. How did that happen? I don't remember.
Yeah, the monks convinced me that they're talking about sin and hell and all these things all the time, right? They're used to preaching to French people, so they got to, right? But they're talking about sin and hell and all these things, and we're doing the Ignatian exercises. I don't know if you've heard of those, probably have, but these exercises where you place yourself in the biblical scenes and you ponder these things in a real meditative state, and you also ponder hell and and heaven and all, the Ignatian exercises are, they really are powerful psychological things that Ignatius came up with.
Now, for our audience, who was Ignatius? When did he live?
So Ignatius at Loyola, Renaissance guy, and he lived, I guess, would have been 1500s for him, and then the Jesuits grew out of Ignatius's experience, which is really interesting because Ignatius in his writing says, look, if the Catholic Church says that this black object is white, you believe it. And the Jesuits have kind of gone the opposite way with that, testing everything and being much more skeptical, I think. But when you read Ignatius himself, he was a serious dude too. I mean, he was really, really into this. And Ignatius created this Ignatian exercises to really, to discern where you're at with God, I think would be the way to put it, right? And they have at-home versions. You could do it. Ignatius wrote it as a 30-day retreat. We did it as a 5-day retreat. You can do it, all sorts of different ways. But in these exercises, you're really questioning everything. And so through all this, the monks convinced me that I have a mortal sin on my soul. I'm like, you're talking about me?
Okay, a mortal sin. What do you mean?
That would be
by a mortal sin.
It would be defined as a choice made in grave. And to be fair, they never said I had a mortal sin on my soul. I am the one
who
inferred listened. I inferred it, yeah. And because you got to be really careful about saying to somebody, you got a mortal sin, you're going to hell. Church doesn't really do that. But they say, well, here are the rules, right? And studying, and the way he laid it out, and he played it, so Father Andre played it so well, because I'm like, well, then hear my confession. He's like, confessions are tomorrow afternoon. And I'm like, well, what if I'm not going to die in a monastery, but I spend 24 hours just pondering, like, well, what if I did die? Do I really have mortal sin? Can you really go to hell? Does anybody go to hell?
But you weren't being flip about it. I mean, this really hit you.
Yeah, it did. I mean, it was being in this monastery where I talk about the silence. The silence was incredible. Like, for us, noise is normal, silence breaks it up. In this monastery, silence is normal. Noise breaks it up. Like, you don't even like this squeaking chair, it'd be like super loud, So it was.
So in this context,
place you were,
you're listening to one of the monks, and he says something which makes you, Peter, come to the conclusion that you may be walking around with an unforgiven mortal sin on your soul. Now, are you able to talk about what that is?
Well, I'd rather leave it for to read the book, But it's not that hard to fall into the category of something that these guys would consider a mortal sin. And one of the things that kind of gave me some comfort in my frustration here was everybody I know has done something these guys would consider a mortal sin. Now, would I have died and gone to hell? If I died, would I have gone to hell? In mortal sin, you have to be unrepentant, right? Until your moment of death. It has to take all the love out of your heart. And so, it's possible that my act of sin may not have been mortal. And I think I probably knew that at the time. But it raises the whole question that you can die and go to hell. You can actually go to hell. And don't we all struggle with that, right? I mean...
Well, no, we don't all struggle with that, but some people do, and some people should.
Well, we should, right?
It depends what you mean by that when you say struggle, but I mean, I would argue, and I think you would argue, that everyone should take that seriously. Mm-hmm. It's not some medieval notion to be dismissed by modern minds, mm-hmm. which it has become.
Yeah.
But part of what's interesting to me, because you're in the Catholic tradition and I'm not, but as I say, I think in my longer endorsement of the book, that I have deep respect for the Catholic mm-hmm. tradition, and I've mm-hmm. always maintained that anything that's true, I want that. Yeah. I don't want to say, well, that's for them. Or is it true? Is it God's will for mm-hmm. me to learn something? And I think there are a lot of people that are looking for something deeper, looking for something liturgical, or there's something about that. We can criticize that all day long, mm-hmm. and at the same time, we long for something more than just,
mm-hmm.
me in a room
Yeah.
with God. But the mechanics, when you say you come to this conclusion that you may have a mortal sin on your soul, and you go to the priest and you say, I need to confess this. And he says to you, confession's tomorrow at afternoon. You get really angry
I do, yeah.
because he seems to be like, meh, like
Yeah.
that is, I mean, I think it's natural that you got angry because
Yeah.
you're actually looking for forgiveness. But as a non-Catholic, I would say all you have to do is confess it earnestly to God.
Sure. And so does he. He says, well, you have perfect penitence, don't you?
What is that? That's what I want to.
At the time, I didn't really know what that was, and I said, of course I do, and walked out of the room, And perfect penitence is where you're sorry for your sin because you don't want to offend God, because you love God so much that you want to offend God. Again, it has to do with the heart, right? Imperfect penitence is, well, I just don't want to go to hell, right? That's not about loving. That's a heart that's focused on self.
Right.
Right? And this whole thing about heaven and hell is, as C.S. Lewis says, either my will be done or thy will be done, right? So he talks about perfect penitence. I think Father Andre played it perfectly. I think he knew exactly what he was doing, to give me that time to ponder that, and that this whole book came out of it, right? But I think what I came away with in that was, I think in our modern times, and everybody, including Christians, has got this impression that everybody goes to heaven, and maybe Hitler's in hell, maybe there's a couple people, maybe an axe murderer, some mass murderers are in hell, but everybody's in heaven. But that's the exact opposite of the Christian tradition from the beginning, right? I mean, Jesus said that the road to heaven is narrow and few find it, and the highway to hell is broad and wide. And I talk about how in Michelangelo's Last Judgment, there's a book of life and a book of the damned. The book of life is like this big,
Right.
and the book of the damned is like a National Geographic Atlas of the world. You can barely hold it, you know. And so, but we've reversed that now, and we just assume everybody's going to heaven. And I appreciate God's mercy, but I think it goes back. I think we couldn't handle the notion that the fear of God, that you should fear God, but we fear gravity. And that's a good thing, right? Like people aren't jumping out of windows because they know that that's a serious thing. Gravity will take you out. And I think we've got to fear God in the sense that, God made some rules. And it's so interesting in the Garden of Eden that the rule is so capricious almost. Like you can have any fruit from any tree, just not that one. And Chesterton talks about this beautifully, where he says, you can live in a palace of gold as long as you don't say the word cow.
Yeah.
Or you can...
Well, no, I used to read a lot of folklore and folktales, and many of them exactly like that. We had, I recently interviewed Martin Shaw, and he talks about east of the sun, west of the moon, and it's this bizarre thing. The woman marries the bear, and but just don't do this one thing.
And it doesn't make sense, right? Chesterton says, an incomprehensible joy, heaven, rests upon an incomprehensible condition. Don't say the word cow. Yeah. Don't eat from that tree. Why not? Why can't I eat from that tree? I can eat from every other tree, but not that tree.
Right.
It's just a test of your pride. It's just a test of your selfishness, right? But this is where I think we have a problem. And again, this goes to our scientific age. Everybody's always like, well, God wouldn't send somebody to hell because of that. And I was trying to figure it out. But it's like, don't say the word cow. You can't figure it out. It's just God's rule. And you just have to deal with it.
Well, I mean, like you say several times in your book, I think it's both, right? In other words, I think that there's room for thinking about what is the character and nature of God, and would God do that? Does that go along? There's room for that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that can go too far to where you put yourself in the place of God and you're deciding everything when God has clearly said X.
I think in a way it has gone too far. Things that in the Christian tradition you would have always considered to be against Scripture, to be against God, we're now saying, oh no, you know what? We figured out that's okay.
Right.
That you really can do that.
Well, some people have said that.
You can say the word cow. It's okay.
Right.
Show her a nut. Show the princess an onion. Nothing's going to go wrong.
Right.
And it reminds me of Jesus' parable about the vineyard, right? The guy owns some land. He builds a vineyard on it. It's a beautiful vineyard, puts a hedge around it. goes away, hires some tenants, and the tenants think they own the place, right? So he starts sending his people back to get the produce, and they're beating them up, and then eventually he sends his son, and they kill his son, thinking illogically that then they'll get the vineyard, not realizing they have no standing. And this is the same thing in fairy tales, and Chesterton talks about this too, where, if you were to respond to the fairy godmother and say, well, why can't I say the word cow in this palace of gold? She could simply say to you, explain the palace of gold. How'd that get here? How'd you get here at all, right? So we want to fight God on these things and say, God, why can't, same-sex attraction, whatever it is, why can't I do this? And it's like, explain how you exist at all.
Actually, that is one thing that I read in your book and thought, that really speaks to me, particularly that I hadn't thought of that. Because a lot of times something's sort of obvious, but you haven't really taken it in.
Mm-hmm.
When you write, I don't know exactly where in the book, but you talk about the simplest idea in the world, that we're created by God. He created us. Mm-hmm. And you clarify the idea that I just hadn't really thought about it before. Because we go, oh yeah, God created me. But then you realize, no, God, it's like if you create something, mm-hmm. It's yours. You've created it.
Right. We have no standing. I mean, like you have to have, like, you have to be registered in a state to have legal standing in a lawsuit, right? Like, we have no legal standing. Like, we don't even know how we got here. I talk in the book about how we live in this building that has no first floor, and we all pretend it's not a big deal, Or I talk about Neil deGrasse Tyson saying in Nova, and then life was created, and it's a great mystery, and then he just keeps going, like. Wait a minute, that should be the whole 25 episodes.
Biggest thing, well...
That should be the whole 25 episodes is how did life get here, right?
You may be aware that I've written a book called Is Atheism Dead, where that's why I wrote the book. Like that right there, like, you say, excuse me, what?
You can't gloss over that.
What?
Yeah. Like we're living in a building with no first floor. And we try to not be nervous about it, but we ought to be.
Okay. I want to go back to this idea because, again, coming to this story as a non-Catholic, I'm fascinated, but there's so much that I'm fascinated by. And one of those things is what you just referred to, is that you suddenly are aware that you may have a mortal sin on your soul, which mm-hmm. could take you to hell. And you mm-hmm. take that seriously. And you say to the priest, I want to confess. Mm-hmm. And he's like, nah, tomorrow, and you're annoyed. And then he says, but you have perfect penitence. In other words, on some level, you've already dealt with it. So if you were to die tonight, because you have dealt with it, you wouldn't go to hell. Is that what perfect penitence is?
Yeah. A mortal sin that would take you to hell drives the love out of your heart. So there's no love for God, there's no love for life, there's no love for people, it's just selfishness, right? It's a hard heart, right? It's hard-heartedness. And perfect penitence is, I love God. And I mean, you have to go to confession when you get the chance.
See, that's where I want to go, because having written a biography myself of Martin Luther, that's the nub, right?
Yeah.
That Luther is saying that it's by faith that if I repent before God genuinely,
right.
not just say
mm-hmm.
it, not
mm-hmm.
just claim to, but act genuinely, that I'm forgiven in that moment, and that, in a sense, the priest, the church can only ratify that. Mm-hmm. But the church has taught no, that only we, the church, can dispense that.
Right.
And it seems that in this passage in your book, you're helping me understand that it's not quite that clear somehow.
Well, because there is room for perfect penitence and for you to do it yourself. But, I think Luther's point was we can all go to God without any mediation here on earth. And I see it, the Catholic Church, which, the confession, the sacraments, the mediation of all these things that, I know evangelicals will say, I don't need that. I can go directly to God. I don't need the saints. I don't need the community of saints, all that. I think there's a tremendous danger for self-delusion in human beings, And I think it's easy to just play house, to just pretend I got this relationship with God, I believe this, I can do this. I remember somebody once telling me they weren't going to pay their rent. They had some Bible verse for it, and they were like, because Jesus didn't pay his taxes or something like that, and they were mad at their landlord, and they were, and so we have this ability for self-delusion, and the structure of the Catholic Church, for me personally, it helps break, and particularly in this whole book, this whole story is about it. It helps break up my desire to just play house, to just make it up. Just I know what's in my heart. I know what's going on here. Mm-hmm. I can forgive that. God will forgive that. I can do this. I can do that. It's like, no, there's actually rules here.
Well, what I like, and again, this is why I always want to learn from every tradition, because to me, what's true is true, and God's will is God's will, and I don't care where it's coming from. Mm-hmm. I want to know, and clearly, something that has been lost in the evangelical tradition, and it took centuries, because the first 30 years of Protestantism looked extremely like the Catholic Church, just
very
with tiny
differences,
and Luther's view of the sacrament and all that stuff. And it took a long time.
Even Mary, he had a book dedicated to Mary.
Of course. Right, and so, whenever we're talking about the Protestant Church or evangelicalism, there's no there. We're talking about a million different things. Mm-hmm. But I do think it's true that one of the things about modernity, and again, you can see the Protestant Church kind of floating into the world of modernity, is a disdain for formality, mm-hmm. liturgy, tradition, symbol, to wipe it away and say, man, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And it's like saying, I don't need to get married because we love each other and we're good. We don't need to go through some ceremony. So talk a little bit about that, about the value of ritual.
Yeah. A structure outside of yourself, right? And let me begin, though, by saying that I have deep respect for the evangelical experience because I had it. In the late 1990s, I did the born again thing. I had an NIV study Bible, and I listened to Chuck Colson and Charles Stanley and Christian rock and all that stuff, and I was deeply into it. And then one day I went back to church. My mom was very patient because she had been watching the 700 Club. She was a big fan of Pat Robertson and all that. And so she was like, okay. She was very patient. One day she said, why don't you come to church with me? And I went back to church, and the priest came down and blessed the Easter water with a blessing that covered every symbol for water in the Bible. I thought, I thought Catholics didn't read the Bible. That was kind of interesting. And then they got up and did the first reading from the Old Testament, the Psalm, the second reading from the epistles, and then the Gospel. I was like, whoa, that's a lot of scripture for people who don't know the Bible. Mm-hmm. It was about a year after I was evangelical. And then I heard the Eucharistic prayer, and I thought, well, I either got to get up and run or I got to be Catholic. Because, again, it was something beyond anything that I could do with just me and my NIV study Bible. And that's why I came back to the Catholic Church. But my point being that I still have a lot of evangelical practices in my life, and that really, I think, rounded out my faith, really helped me understand more about Jesus and a personal relationship with Jesus. But the reason I came back to the Catholic Church is, again, I don't trust myself. I don't want it to just be about me and my reading of Scripture. And people say, well, it's my pastor's reading of Scripture. But as soon as they disagree with the pastor, you can get a bunch of people go, don't we disagree with him? There's a guy down the block teaching something that we agree, And I'd totally be there. I'd be like, yeah, let's get away from this guy. Let's go to that guy. Part of this whole Catholic experience is trying to run onto a brick wall of stuff that you don't agree with. And that's why I get pretty crabby in that part of the book, from my fun times in Paris to wait a minute, what?
Well, there's so much in the book. You talk about Lewis, you talk about Tolkien, John Milton, obviously, T.S. Eliot, but you also, there are a lot of pop cultural references in the book. I'm trying to think what the first one was, where you're tracing the phrase from...
Misty Mountains. Yeah, and it goes from Shakespeare to Tolkien to Led Zeppelin.
Right.
Or Piper at the Gates of Dawn.
Piper at the Gates of Dawn.
That goes from whoever wrote that book. Graham Greene, is that who wrote it?
No. Kenneth Graham?
Kenneth Graham. Okay, yeah, Kenneth Graham to Pink Floyd's first album.
Right.
And it also shows up in Tolkien and Lewis and all that stuff, yeah. So, I mean, I would rather, I might have got that from you. I mean, you're always, referring to pop culture and the idea, though, is that, like, when we say, in Him we live and move and have our being, we're talking about God, obviously, right, in the Holy Spirit. But really, we live and move and have our being in our culture, right? So for me, it was Frasier, Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix, Columbo, whatever. I mean, these are the things I grew up with.
Columbo.
Yeah, right. I mean, you remember Columbo. I know.
Are you kidding?
I know your age. So, but these are things that we grew up with, and they were everywhere. So when I'm talking about, in one point, about how God duped me,
Yeah.
I could have gone back to, was it Jeremiah? He said, "You duped me, God." I could have referred, but I referred to this time with Frasier, tried to make a deal with God. God got the better of course, and Frasier's like, "Well played, God." Like, isn't it more fun to find God at work in the culture? I mean, we can keep referring to biblical references, and of course we do. And I think usually I also cross-reference the Bible, but there's so many ways that you can just cross-reference the culture that we live in.
Well, one of the things, one of the main things of the book is that you present yourself, I don't know, what's the cliche term? You're saint and sinner. In other words, you're somebody who has taken the things of God extremely seriously for a long time, and you're very educated, and you know all that stuff, and yet you present yourself in the book as someone who has a long way to go, or who has a real sense of your own failings, which is extremely refreshing. But talk about that.
Well, I mean, I'm in good company with Augustine, right? And Teresa of Lisieux's story of a little flower, story of a life. I mean, she's so great. If you haven't read Teresa of Lisieux's biography, she's in this
Was she
monastery.
one of the Inklings?
Just
kidding.
Was not.
Just kidding.
She's in this monastery, and she says, and every time I saw that nun coming at me, I thought, I can't stand her, And she said, but I smiled at her, and eventually that nun came to her and said, I was going through some really tough stuff, and every time you smiled at me, it kept me going, right? So I mean, there's this sense that how can we really understand how God works in our lives if we're not honest about the dark side of what's going on inside of us? Because it's there. I mean, I talk in my book too about how the blessed assurance thing, and evangelicals, when I'm sitting at dinner with them and they go around the table talking about the moment they were saved, and then in 1998 I got down on my knees and I was saved, and I think, well, which one of the 25 times I did that am I going to mention when it comes around to me? Because for me it's this constant
You better have
struggle.
one, or you're not
That's
saved.
right. Oh no, you better have
No,
one. Right, yeah.
See, this is what I love, and we've talked about this over the years without cameras, but it is interesting how some people come up with a formula, but then I get annoyed if a Catholic like you says all evangelicals do X, because I'm thinking, no, they don't, because I've seen the same thing where because it's about honesty. I mean, we have to say, like I always say that I don't know the exact date, but it was basically June or July of 1988. I had this dream that completely changed my life, absolutely dramatically. There's just no doubt about it. Like Jesus comes in. Okay, but I can look back before that, and can I honestly say that I wasn't an atheist. I wasn't some proud God-rejecting sinner. I can see God's grace here and here, and I think a lot of people have stories like that.
Sure.
Where it is complicated, but I think the danger. This gets to the idea that I think a lot of people feel that there was. In other words, this isn't true of everybody, but there are people who feel like there was a moment when I kind of became a new person, and everything I did before that that really was the past. That even though I'm the same
Yeah.
person, I'm a different person. That happens for some people.
Yeah, and
It
I wonder
does.
if being a cradle Catholic, though, like I grew up with these nuns
Right.
teaching me, and they loved me so much, and they're the ones who told me, asking you shall receive, Matthew 7:7. I think I was in third grade. That became my favorite Bible verse from like third grade, right? But I remember that in high school, my brothers refused to go to church on Sunday, and my mom looked at me and said, if I can't make them go, I can't make you go. And I was like, what am I going to do? So I thought, you know what, I'll go to church, and I'll just listen and pay attention. And if I believe what they're saying, I'll keep going. And I remember walking up to the door, going in, the first 5 minutes really keying in, and I've been going to church ever since. So that was a big moment. But I could tell you a lot of things I did that the monks wouldn't have liked since then.
Right.
Then I had to have another moment, and I had
Yeah.
another moment, then I had this moment, and keep bringing me back.
Yeah, I mean, so that's what I mean. I think that there's beauty and danger in both those kinds of narratives,
But look
because
at
there's
Peter.
some
I talk
people-
in the book about Peter versus Judas, right? Judas didn't come back. It wasn't even on his radar, right? But Peter could have saved Jesus if he would have said, yeah, I'm with that guy. And let me tell you, he didn't do anything wrong. And all of us right here around this fire should go in there and speak up for him, right? That could have changed the course of history, right? But he was afraid to. And he left and he wept bitterly. But then he came back, right? And, that keep coming back is, at least for me, and God's story is different with everybody, but for me, that's huge.
Well, in your case, I mean, I see it because I know your life, but there are people who I think they're kind of playing games with God. Like
Sure,
they'll say stuff like,
sure.
"Oh, I'm God's favorite sinner," or
Yeah,
or
right.
"Yeah, I'm a Catholic, but I'm not perfect," or what. And you go,
Yeah.
like, "Well, do you?" In other words, you're kind of somehow saying, "Well, I'm not ready to go all in,"
Yeah.
or something
Yeah.
like that.
But that's not just Catholics. I've met a few.
No, that's what I.
evangelicals
No, of
who-
course.
yeah, who feel
Well,
that
that's
way.
when I said the
Yeah.
phrase, "Oh, I'm God's favorite sinner."
Yeah.
That was an evangelical
Yeah.
who
Yeah,
I
yeah,
remember
yeah.
saying that. And you're like, well, that could be a beautiful and true statement, or it
Yeah.
could be kind of a cynical statement.
I talk in the book about Hamlet's pause, and to be or not to be speech. Hamlet's getting ready to throw himself off a tower or kill himself, however he's going to kill himself. That's the question. Is it nobler to just stay alive and suffer these things, or should I just kill myself and end it? He says to sleep,
Perchance to
But he
dream.
says, perchance to dream, and then in the sleep of death, what dreams might come? It is that which gives us pause. And if people get anything out of this book, I hope that they pause. I hope that they just pause and say, how am I doing, and what am I sweeping under the rug, and what am I ignoring, and, where do I need to come back? Weep bitterly like Peter did, but come back. You got to come back, right? I mean, I think that that's the key. Just keep coming back. And that was the message that Jesus gave me in this book during my dark night of the soul there, that I think was so important.
When you are going through this Ignatian retreat, right? There are these exercises to which you refer, and you talk about part of it is trying to have a dialogue with God. And you say that you actually heard him speaking to you. I'm always fascinated at the mechanics of this,
Yeah.
because people can say that cavalierly, but I always want to drill down.
right.
What do you mean?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people will sloppily say, "Well, I think God did it," and he's
Yeah.
like, "That God didn't say that. Was just your emotion."
Yeah.
But for you, it was much more.
And it is. I mean, I still have that experience, particularly since I started going to Eucharistic adoration. I've had it much more, this idea of God speaking to me. And you and I talked about this once. You said, what is it like? You know how you have like 35 layers of thought in your head at every 1 minute? It's like for just a brief nanosecond, it all gets clamped down and stops. Then God puts his word in there, and then it all starts up again. And so you hear it, for me anyway, when he speaks to me, there's only one layer of thought at that moment, not 35. That's what it's like.
And what does it take to get there? Is it just, you refer to it as Eucharistic adoration? In other words, you go into a church and you're
Alone.
in meditation.
Yeah.
before
Typically
God.
alone with the Blessed Sacrament, with Christ and the Blessed Sacrament, the hocus pocus stuff that we talk about in the book. This idea that the Eucharist is the living bread that's come down from heaven. And there have been Eucharistic miracles where it's plenty of these. You can look up the Eucharist miracles. It is, every host is a slice of a human heart under stress. It's Jesus' heart on the cross. That's what we believe.
Now, Luther's
Christ's
view,
body
and
is.
people don't know this, but it was extremely close to this.
Yeah, it was. It was just
it was basically this
Yeah.
without Aristotle.
Yeah, it didn't continue on after the moment of, once you received it, or once the service was over, it was over. So they don't reserve the Blessed Sacrament. They don't keep the Blessed Sacrament like Catholics would, which is how we can adore it. Right?
But I guess I'm just referring to this idea that, whenever people throw around terms like Protestantism or whatever, Luther said,
Yeah.
What is it? Hoc est corpus meum.
No.
This is my body.
No, those are the words of consecration. Hoc est corpus meum are the words of consecration. And I don't know if it was Luther or somebody else that turns the bread to wine at that moment. Luther or somebody else said, oh, that's hocus pocus.
No, I know that. But I'm saying, but Luther, he was like having an argument or a debate with Zwingli or somebody.
Uh-huh.
And he writes this on the table, this is my body.
Uh-huh.
And he covers it over with a tablecloth, and he's getting in this argument with, I'm pretty sure it's Zwingli. And at some point he takes off the tablecloth and he says, look what it says. There's no ambiguity. Jesus says, this is my body, period.
Yeah.
And so for a lot of people who think about that, there's some people who would say, oh, it's just a symbol. And clearly Luther
struggled with
did not think it was just a symbol. No, he didn't think it was just a symbol.
No, he didn't. Yeah. Well, read John 6. The word for to chew there is like, it's like an animal chewing its cud. I mean, when he says, you eat my body, and unless you eat my flesh, it literally says, unless you chew my flesh, right? And everybody left. Well, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And every time I walk into a Catholic church, I genuflect because I believe the Word is flesh dwelling among us, And so that's what brought me back from evangelicalism back to Catholicism. Mm-hmm. It was the Eucharist. And I think a lot of people would say that.
Well, so that's what you do. You do this Eucharistic adoration. And while you're doing this meditation, because you're not, are you
reading,
praying or are you
praying,
just being
you're
quiet?
talking, all of that, but it is silent. Again, so silence plays a role in it. And I think silence is almost impossible to really achieve real silence. But in this church where there's Eucharistic adoration 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, there's no talking, right? So there's a case where silence is the norm and talking is not. So it might have something to do with the silence. And you're talking to Jesus, you're reading scripture, you're reading stuff, and you just feel, you get that, you hear that voice. I mean, and sometimes Jesus says the funniest things to me. I mean, I remember, not everybody gets this joke, but I remember one time saying, are you really the king of the universe? I'm looking at this Eucharistic host, and I'm saying, are you really the king of the universe, in charge of everything? He says, yeah, why do you think people say my name when something goes wrong?
Now, see, this is because I know there are going to be people who hear this who sneer or scoff, but I know you, and so you somehow heard him say that. You don't hear an audible voice, but you heard him say that to you.
When you think things, they don't catch you off guard or surprise you. I mean, sometimes they might, but if they do, they're at the end of a chain, you got there, right? You don't have stuff that just comes out of nowhere and makes you laugh or go, whoa, where'd that come from? It's
You can tell the difference.
You can tell the difference, and luckily I'm not the only person in the world who has that. I like Joel Osteen always says, not out loud, but down here. I heard his voice, not out loud, but down here, right? Lots of people have this experience where, you feel like God is talking to you, but again, we have to be so careful because our capacity for self-delusion, which is a big part of this book, is so ripe. I mean, self-delusion is so easy, right? It's so easy to play house, to pretend that I'm a Christian, to pretend that me and Jesus are good. How many times have you been at a wedding reception with your drunk cousins? They're like, oh, God knows me, man. He's cool with me. And you're like, okay, that's cool. Maybe, I don't know your heart, but self-delusion is so easy. right?
Well, right. Self-delusion's easy, but you and I have both would say and do say that we have had those moments, and we know that it wasn't from us. It came from some. I mean, I've had very, very rare, but definitely have experienced it. And I want more of that. And it's one of the reasons I enjoyed reading your book, because it just made a space for me to think about that kind of thing. We just have minutes left. So I'll ask you the most basic question. Why should somebody who's watching, why should they read this book?
Well, I like what you said about, you got to read a lot of books, and these books can be difficult to get through. And I've read a lot of Catholic books, and some of them you got to read, or Christian books, some of them you got to read standing up, right? Because you're going to fall asleep if you don't. But God graced me here with a voice and a moment in which I can wrestle with, I think, the most important questions we have: death, judgment, heaven, and hell, in a way that is engaging and not. I hope the book is not trying to beat you over the head with what I believe.
It's not.
It's really just saying,
I wouldn't
this
be
is what
sitting
happened
here.
to me.
I wouldn't have published it, and
Yeah.
I wouldn't be
Okay.
praising it if I felt it was that kind of a book.
And I got to say, too, to your audience, that the book is very much in conversation with evangelicals. There's an invisible evangelical interlocutor there, because I had that experience.
Of course.
And some of my best friends are evangelical.
Yeah.
And so the book is very much in conversation with evangelicals. And I'm not taking a position. I'm saying, well, evangelicals would say this, but I got this experience.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, that's what I like about you as a person, and it's one of the things I like about the book. What I would say as we close is that, and I said this as we began, the fact that it's a good read is a high compliment, because most books are not a good read. So congratulations
Thank
to
you.
you,
And
Peter
that means
Giersch.
a lot coming from you.
Yeah, it's important for books to be readable. So congratulations
Thanks, Eric.
on talking of Michelangelo. If you think these conversations are valuable, would you do us a favor and please like this video and subscribe to this channel? When you do that, you help us get these conversations out to a wider audience by telling YouTube that people are interested in this. Also, you can go to SocratesInTheCity.com, sign up for our newsletter, and you can check back every week. There's new stuff here every week. Thank you for tuning in.